I made jokes about his insecurities, thinking it was funny that he felt humiliated and left. So, this is going to be a bit of a long one, but I really need to get something off my chest. I'm hoping some of you might understand or at least offer a perspective on how I messed up. So, I'll give you a little background so you understand where I'm coming from. I've been with my husband Jake for about 5 years and we've been married for just over a year. To be honest, we didn't always see ourselves as. When we first got together, marriage wasn't really on our radar. We were both young, focused on our careers and content with just being in a committed relationship. Neither of us thought marriage was a must, and that it would change much about our relationship. Then something shifted for me. It was a few years ago after my sister got married. Her wedding was absolutely beautiful, everything from the ceremony to the reception was perfect. It made me rethink my own views on marriage. I started to see it as something meaningful and special, something I wanted to experience. I wanted to see it as something meaningful and special, something I wanted to experience. I talked to Jake about how my perspective had changed, and told him how I felt about wanting to have a wedding, and a more formal commitment someday. Jake was incredibly supportive and understanding. He was on board with the idea and genuinely excited about it. It was clear he wanted to make me happy and build a future together, so he proposed a year ago. Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of. And our honeymoon was just as magical. We had a beautiful start to married life, and for the first year, everything seemed great. Jake is an amazing husband. He's thoughtful, caring, and always goes out of his way for me. He's 27 and I'm 26. We both thought we had a beautiful marriage, and were building something lasting and fulfilling together. We had a traditional setup in our marriage. Jake was the primary breadwinner. He worked hard to support us and paid all the bills while I stayed at home. I was the at-home wife, managing the household. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. We had a solid, loving relationship and our dynamic worked well for us. Jake was always attentive and caring and I felt lucky to have him. However, there was one aspect of our relationship that wasn't as smooth. I tend to joke around and poke fun at things. I've always found humor in almost everything. I enjoy making light of things. I made a conscious effort to lighten up the atmosphere with some light-hearted comments and jokes, even if it sometimes meant making fun of things that others might find sensitive. It was just my way of navigating through life and keeping things light and enjoyable. However, Jake wasn't a fan of my jokester side. He had his own struggles with insecurities, which I didn't fully appreciate until later. Despite being attractive and physically fit, he had a well-built physique and was generally considered good-looking. Jake carried a lot of emotional baggage from his past years of bullying and negative experiences that had deeply affected him. Jake was teased and treated harshly from a young age, which left him with a lot of insecurities. He might have seemed confident to others, but inside he struggled with self-doubt. I didn't always recognize the extent of these insecurities, especially because he seemed so capable and strong on the outside. I now realize that my jokes and teasing, which I thought were harmless, were actually hitting some of Jake's deepest insecurities. I never intended to hurt him. My comments were meant to highlight. I was kind and playful, but I didn't realize how much it affected him. My attempts at humor sometimes upset him too. Jake's insecurities weren't something he talked about often, and I didn't understand the impact of my behavior until it was too late. He kept his feelings to himself, so when he did express discomfort or hurt, it was usually in a way that I didn't always pick up on. I didn't always pick up on the small ways that I was affecting Jake. I thought it would be okay to make light of his insecurities because I believed it would make him laugh and somehow help him feel more confident. Joking about these things was a way to bond, show that they weren't a big deal and prove that we were comfortable enough with each other to laugh at ourselves. I never intended to cause any harm, but now looking back I can see how wrong I was at first. Jake would laugh along with me, even if the jokes hit a little too close to home. He'd still muster a smile or a chuckle, and I took that as a sign that he was okay with it. I figured that if he laughed it must not hurt him, but over time I noticed a shift. He wasn't laughing as much anymore when I made these jokes. I didn't mean to cause any harm, but looking back, I can see how wrong I was at first. Jake would laugh along with me, even if the jokes hit a little too close to home. He'd still muster a smile or a chuckle, and I took that as a sign that he was okay with it. I figured that if he laughed, it must not hurt him. But over time, I noticed a shift. Jake wasn't laughing as much anymore when I made these jokes. Instead, he'd get quiet, his smile would fade, and he sometimes seemed really upset. I brushed it off, thinking he was just being overly sensitive or that he needed to toughen up. I convinced myself it was just a joke and that he should know I was kidding, but I now realize that I wasn't just joking. I was exploiting his insecurities, and I did it constantly. It wasn't just a one-off thing. It wasn't long before I was making these jokes all the time. I didn't see how they could be harmful, especially when I was in public or at family gatherings, parties, weddings, or game nights. I always managed to slip in a joke about Jake's insecurities. I guess I just couldn't help myself, even though deep down I should have known better. One time during a dinner party with friends, the conversation shifted to childhood memories. Jake told me a story about being teased in high school for being overweight. It was clearly a vulnerable moment for him, and instead of offering reassurance or empathy, I made a joke about how lucky I was to have met him after he had hit the gym. Everyone laughed, but I should have noticed that Jake wasn't laughing. He was just quiet, almost shrinking into himself. Another time at a family barbecue, Jake's dad brought up how Jake used to struggle with sports as a kid. Instead of supporting him, I made a joke about how he should have stuck with it. I either made a joke about Jake or changed the subject. I said something like, "Maybe it's because he's not coordinated that he didn't make the gym team." Everyone laughed, but Jake didn't smile. I should have seen that. It wasn't just in public. In private, I kept doing the same thing. Jake had planned a dinner date for us, which was a big deal because he wasn't a great cook. He usually ordered food for our special nights because he knew his skills in the kitchen weren't the best. But instead of appreciating the effort he put in, I joked about his inability to cook. I complained about having to eat takeout again, even though I knew he was trying his best. I didn't realize how much that must have hurt him. There was another time when I joked about a small scar on Jake's face from an old injury. I would bring it up often, making light of it. When Jake would grumble, I'd tell him he was being too sensitive. I didn't realize that I was making him feel self-conscious. I was aware that this was already a sensitive issue for him. Even something as simple as Jake being shy, and sometimes struggling to express affection publicly, became fodder for my jokes. I would tease him about not holding my hand or being awkward when we were out together, without realizing that I was only making him more self-conscious. I was aware of my behavior and I knew it was making him feel uncomfortable. I didn't just tease him about small things, I also made jokes about more sensitive topics like his financial insecurities. One time Jake opened up about feeling insecure about his career and worried that he wasn't providing enough for us. Instead of offering support, I tried to make the mood lighter with a joke that I was the real breadwinner, even though he was the one working. I thought it was a harmless joke at the time. It made him feel inadequate and unappreciated. It wasn't just his career I joked about. I also made fun of his physical abilities. I did it during a workout when Jake was struggling with a particular exercise. I thought it would motivate him, but I now realize it probably only made him feel worse about himself. All of these moments added up and created a painful pattern that I was too blind to see at the time. Each joke, each jab chipped away at Jake's self-esteem. I was really hurting Jake's feelings and making him feel bad about himself. I thought I was just being funny, but I was actually hurting the person I loved the most. Looking back, I wish I had been more aware of how my words were affecting Jake. I wish I had recognized the impact of my words, but instead, I continued down the same destructive path, thinking it was all harmless fun. I ignored the signs, the quiet moments after my jokes, the way Jake would sometimes withdraw into himself instead of being more sensitive. I kept on going, making things worse with every thoughtless comment. When I say I made fun of everything, I truly mean everything. Nothing was off limits in my attempts to be funny, even though I can now see that my jokes were far from lighthearted. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was tearing down the very person I claimed to love. For example, during one of our regular game nights with friends, we were reminiscing about high school experiences. The conversation turned to dating, and I thought it would be funny to bring up the fact that it took Jake a long time to get a date in high school. I laughed about how shy and awkward he was back then. I was really awkward back then. I thought it was just a harmless joke, but I didn't stop to think about how that must have made Jake feel. I even made fun of his teenage insecurities, even though I knew they were still a source of embarrassment. even after all these years. Another time, while we were on vacation with another couple, we decided to spend a day at the beach. Jake was always a bit self-conscious. He was conscious about his body and reluctant to take off his shirt. I didn't respect his feelings or offer him any quiet reassurance. I tried to be light-hearted. I told him he had nothing to hide and that his teenage insecurities needed to stay in the past. I was trying to encourage him, but in hindsight I realized I probably only made him feel more pressured and embarrassed. I wasn't giving him the support he needed. Instead, I made him feel exposed and vulnerable in front of our friends, even at family dinner. I couldn't resist making jokes at Jake's expense. I would talk about how early in our relationship I had to make all the first moves because Jake was so shy. I'd recount these stories in a way that made Jake. I now realize that my jokes made Jake feel insecure and like he lacked the confidence to pursue me. I didn't intend to make him feel this way, but I now understand that my jokes probably made him feel emasculated and ashamed of his natural shyness. I thought I was just being funny and helping Jake by pushing him to laugh at his insecurities, but in reality I was doing the exact opposite. Instead of building him up, I was tearing him down and making him feel small and inadequate. The more I joked, the more I chipped away at his self-esteem. I wish I had realized sooner that my words, which I hadn't meant seriously, were causing Jake so much pain. I wish I had been more considerate, more loving, more aware of how deeply my words were affecting him. I realized that my jokes were hurting him. I wish I had chosen kindness over cruelty and support over sarcasm. But it's too late now. The boiling point was finally reached at a group dinner with our friends. We were all sitting around the table enjoying the conversation when the topic shifted to high school experiences. I thought it was just a bit of lighthearted fun. I made a joke about Jake's height back in high school. I mentioned how he was shorter then, and even joked that I didn't really blame the bullies for picking on him because if I were there I might have done the same. I added that he was lucky he got a growth spurt and was tall now. I thought it would come off as a playful tease, but when I looked at Jake I saw something different in his eyes. It was something I hadn't seen before. Jake was clearly hurt. He tried to laugh it off and even forced a smile, but it was obvious that he was upset. The conversation felt awkward, and I realized I'd crossed a line, but I didn't fully understand the impact until later that night. Jake pulled me aside after we got home. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was tense. He told me he felt belittled and disrespected by my jokes. He said he'd been trying to work on his self-esteem. He said that he'd struggled with this for years and that my constant remarks were like a punch to the gut. He also said that he felt like I didn't value him, and that my jokes always made him feel small and insecure. I was taken aback. I didn't know how to respond. In my mind, I was just joking around trying to keep things light and fun, so I told him that he was overreacting. That it was just a joke, and he shouldn't take it so seriously. Jake wasn't having it. He looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before and asked me how I would feel if he made constant jokes about my weight. I was stunned. I wanted to apologize, but before I could even think of a response, Jake walked away. In the days that followed, everything changed. Jake, who usually helped around the house even after a long day at work, suddenly stopped. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't acknowledge me when I spoke to him, and even avoided being in the same room as me. He completely withdrew, and it was like I didn't exist. He didn't help with the chores or the cooking, which was something he always did, even though he wasn't really good at it. I could see the hurt, and his eyes, every time we passed each other in the house, and it broke my heart. Then, after 4 days of silence, Jake packed a bag and left. He didn't tell me where he was going. When I asked him about it, he just said he was going and didn't answer any of my questions. I was really worried because this was so unlike Jake. He'd never done anything like this before, and I was scared of what it might mean. I tried calling him and sending texts to explain that I never meant to hurt him and that I was sorry. I told him that I wanted to change and that I'd work on being more sensitive to his feelings, but he just replied with a single text saying that I knew I had to respect his need for space, but it was killing me inside. I realized then just how much damage I had done, how far I had pushed him. I was filled with regret, replaying every hurtful joke and every thoughtless comment in my mind. It was clear now that I hadn't taken his feelings seriously, and that was a realization that was hard to take on the chin. I'm really sorry for the pain I caused Jake. I can see now how my actions hurt him, how my jokes, they weren't just jokes, they were daggers that chipped away at his self-worth. I don't want to lose him. I want to fix things and make them right, but I don't know where to start. I feel lost and afraid that I might have pushed him too far. That's why I'm here, reaching out for advice. I've laid everything bare because I need help. I want to be better for Jake. I want to show him that I can change and that I truly care about his feelings. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. It'll take a while to make things right, but I just don't know how. Has anyone been through something similar? Do you have any advice on how to rebuild trust and repair a relationship after hurting someone you love? I'd really appreciate your guidance. I love Jake, and I don't want to lose him over my own foolishness. Update: I got a lot of flack on my last post. A lot of you called me a bully, and you were right. I deserve that. I know I take responsibility for my actions, and I'm not going to make excuses or complain. I know I messed up, and it's all my fault. As for the actual update, I reached out to Jake because I was feeling the silence. I told him that we needed to talk because communication is vital in a marriage. I thought we were solid, like all those other couples who go through rough patches but come out stronger. But when he finally replied, it felt like when we started talking, I could barely keep it together. I told him how sorry I was and promised that I would change. I laid it all out there. The regret, the guilt, the whole 9 yards. But Jake didn't seem interested. He was distant, like he had already made up his mind. Then, like a bombshell, he told me he was done. He said he wanted a divorce. I couldn't believe it. I asked him when things got to that point. I was desperate, begging him to reconsider, but he just looked at me with this finality that I wasn't prepared for. Jake said there was nothing to reconsider. He told me that I never took his feelings seriously. He said I always belittled and disrespected him. He said he was done with that. He wasn't going to stay with someone who made him feel small. He said he replied to my text to let me know he was going to serve me with divorce papers soon. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to find a way to fix this and pull us back from the edge. I asked him about the house and he told me I would need to leave since the house was his. He said he was giving me a few weeks to come to terms with things, which is why he left in the first place. I'm in shock. I feel like I'm going, Jake has changed so much in just a few days I don't even recognize him. I don't understand how things could have gotten so bad so quickly. I thought we had more time and there was a chance to make things right. But now I'm staring down the barrel of a divorce, and it feels like my world is falling apart. I don't know what to do next. I know I messed up, but I never thought it would come to this. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship has been turned upside down, and I'm lost. Update: Hey Reddit, unlike me, a lot of you weren't surprised by my last updates. Some of you even said you saw it coming. I knew you might be right, but it still stings to see so many people say I deserved it and that I had it coming. You can say whatever you want. I knew what I did was wrong and I regret it deeply, but let's be real, I'm pretty sure some of you out there have done worse. As for the actual update, it's been a few weeks since I last posted, and I honestly didn't want to update after that bombshell of a conversation. I was furious. I mean, how dare Jake just disregard me like that? How dare he throw away our marriage all because he couldn't take a joke? I know now that I was wrong, but in the heat of the moment, I was driven by anger, not logic. For the first week or two, I stayed in the house, seething with resentment. I kept thinking, who does Jake think he is? We've been through so much together, and he's going to walk away over some stupid jokes. Sure, they were hurtful, but did they really warrant a divorce at the time? I couldn't see past my own frustration. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. It was suffocating. I packed up my things and moved in with my parents. My plan was to show Jake I was going to give him the divorce he wanted and make him regret ever making that decision. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he was losing, to see that I wouldn't just roll over and let him throw me away like yesterday's news. My parents, on the other hand, were devastated. They didn't see this coming at all and immediately tried to help. They reached out to Jake hoping to reason with him and remind him of the impact his actions had on me. I tried to remind Jake of all the good times we'd had, but he wasn't having any of it. He told my parents that I'd always belittled and disrespected him, and that he wasn't going to put up with it anymore. He said he was done with me, and that nothing, not even my parents, could change his mind. In fact, he said that if they kept pushing, it would only make him hate me more. Hearing that from Jake through my own parents was like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to process it. Part of me was still angry, but another part of me was starting to realize just how much I had hurt him. Yet in that moment, all I could think about was how wrong I believed he was. I was convinced that he was making a huge mistake, that he would regret divorcing me. He had to be right, so here I am back at square one, trying to figure out where things went so horribly wrong. I keep telling myself that Jake is going to regret this, that he's going to wake up one day and realize what he threw away. But deep down I'm starting to. I wonder if I'm going to regret how I treated him. I know I messed up, but I'm still angry. I feel like Jake should have understood that I didn't mean to hurt him. He should have given me a chance to change before getting divorced. Only time will tell who regrets this the most. Update: I'm not really sure how to feel about it. I guess I just feel really tired, worn out, and drained in every possible way. I know it's not much of an update, but I wanted to check in just to remind myself that I'm still here, still moving forward even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. Maybe this exhaustion is more than just physical. Maybe it's everything catching up to me, the stress, the regret, the anger, and the loneliness. It's like my body's finally giving in to the weight of it all. I don't have much else to say right now, other than that I'm feeling a bit lost and exhausted, both mentally and physically. I might have more to share soon, or I might just keep trying to figure out what to do next one day at a time. Thanks for reading. I guess an update is in order. Hey Reddit, I didn't want to update until I had something worth sharing. To be honest, Reddit has been pretty toxic for me lately, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep coming back here. I've seen a lot of comments telling me to get a job just to clear things. I'm still living with my parents, so I haven't been focusing on job hunting just yet. As for the divorce, it's finally been finalized. The process was pretty straightforward, with no complicated issues with child support, custody, or dividing up property. It was a quick, clean break in a way, which I'm grateful for. It might have been less messy, but it also feels oddly impersonal and abrupt. I miss my husband a lot. I really tried my hardest not to break down during the final. I asked Jake if he was sure about this decision. He said that he couldn't stay married to someone who belittled him and made him feel inadequate. It was difficult to accept, but I have to respect his choice. I feel a bit lost and exhausted. I'm not sure what to do next or how to move forward. I'm trying to process everything, and it's a lot to handle. I know it's going to take time, but I'm hoping I can start finding some clarity soon.